Hello, folks. Welcome to this session titled Playing in Performance Capture, Movement for the 21st Century Actor. My name is Charles Douglas, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm so thrilled to have you folks joining, whether you're on the live stream, whether you're in the Zoom webinar right now, or even whether you're actually listening to this recording later in the future. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So excited to speak about this topic with you folks. I want to start off by acknowledging the land on which I currently reside. I am an uninvited settler living on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. My family and I are grateful to live, work, and play on these lands. Back in 2019, I was at the Festival of Live Digital Art, and Adrian Wong, an incredible creative and thinker, invited participants that day into a reflection about how many of the technologies we use in our practice may not be available in some Indigenous communities. And in fact, a lot of these technologies have a significant carbon imprint. That footprint contributes to climate change, which unfortunately disproportionately affects Indigenous folks worldwide. So today I'm reflecting on that, reflecting on the privilege that it is to be in this career and to be gathering with all of you in this way. And I'd like to suggest that we be mindful of the privilege, of the opportunity it is to meet in this way. I hope that by making this offer, we might be opening up access to this medium for some folks. So that's my hope today. And I put a couple of links there if you'd like to learn more about land acknowledgement, about the land I'm on, or about Adrian Wong's work. I also wanted to offer some thank yous. And so thank you before we even begin to the HELP Network, to Julia, to Chip, and to Maihan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored. The generous support of a Chevening Scholarship made it possible for me to pursue postgraduate study and develop my current research and practice. Thank you to Chevening Scholarships, the UK government's global scholarship program funded by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, and partner organizations. Thanks too to my teachers and to the creative communities, institutions, and studios with whom I have been fortunate to work. And my thanks to each of you for joining me for this topic. I can see that the chat has already started getting going. Thank you so much for that, Maihan. And I wanted to invite everyone in the chat, maybe you could share where it is that you are in the world. And then secondly, maybe you could share somebody who inspires you, somebody who's supported your journey and had a positive impact on you. So first, I want to welcome you to share maybe where it is that you're joining us from today. And then secondly, someone who's inspired you or supported you, just like some of these folks I'm thanking today. And while you're doing that, I'll share just very briefly about my own experiences. I have been playing games since as long as I could remember and really grew up playing video games with family and friends. Was really excited about technology and what was possible in that sphere. I first acted in motion capture 11 years ago, 11 years ago now. I worked as an actor and a puppeteer in professional theater, including several productions with the National Arts Centre of Canada's English Theatre Company. I was very privileged to work with them, amazing folks. And I collaborated with Sheridan College's CERT Centre, which is housed at Pinewood Toronto Studios. And some projects that we worked on together include the digital stage, which was co-pursued over a number of years with the Canadian Opera Company and the National Ballet. That work's very exciting. It looks at the future of the digital performing arts in Canada, and it's ongoing. I then went on to study on the MA/MFA Movement Directing and Teaching program at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London, the UK. My MA thesis, which I wrote at that time, was the first to explore actor movement and the medium of performance capture. I'm now the Senior Instructor for Embodied Process at the Vancouver Film School in the acting department, and I contribute internationally to institutions as a guest lecturer. I was thinking about the fact that I know today there are some animators joining us, there are digital artists, there are folks who are actors, there are dancers, and that's only who I know of. I know there are casting directors actually and other production creatives, a real diversity of roles and perspectives. And so I thought I'd share that in the past, I have taught this work to actors, to animators, to directors, to designers, and to teachers. And some past credits include New Tales from the Borderlands, which was just released by Gearbox Software, Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studios, and PitStop Productions. The award-winning VR experience Finding Pandora X from AAA Studios, and working on the transmedia work of Hong Kong-based beingAI. And I thought I'd share with you that research is also a big part of my work. And so some recent publications include a report on research co-authored by Mass Culture and Grossmore and Summer Music into video gaming and the arts sector. It was titled Experimental Play, Interaction, Practice, People, and Possibility. And I contributed a small quote to Julia Bianco Schoeffling's amazing new book, The Art and Business of Acting for Video Games. My copy is just on the bookshelf over there. And if you're part of this chat, and if you're engaging in the question of performance capture and how can I maybe act or contribute to the video game industry, please, I recommend you to pick up a copy of that book. It's fantastic, it's approachable, it's current, it's wonderful stuff. As we move into the plan, I'm just going to open up the chat here and I see some of the folks joining in. And I just want to acknowledge, I see places like Los Angeles. I see Melbourne, Australia. I see Vancouver, the Coast Salish Territories, LA, Tongva, and Chumash Land, Richmond, Irvine, California, San Diego, and so many others. Oh, thanks for sharing. Really exciting to see. And maybe over the next little bit, if you're drawn to it, if you're compelled, I invite you to share maybe the names or communities that have inspired you and supported you as you're developing your own work. And I see a couple of Q&A questions going in, and I want to say to you that's awesome. As we're engaging today, please feel welcome to drop your questions into the Q&A window, and there'll be a dedicated time for that. So what is the plan? Goal number one today, let's define some terms related to motion and performance capture practice. Unfortunately, one of the huge barriers of beginning to engage with this area of the industry is that sometimes there's specialist language, and it can really make it challenging for folks to even know what it is that we're speaking about. So I'd love to unpack a couple of those things today and hopefully remove that barrier. Goal number two is I want to invite you to taste a few exercises for actors, things that I've developed through my practice that I maybe offer in my teaching or my directing. And I hope that it might give you a little insight into some of the work that we might continue to develop together over a longer time. Goal number three, let's ask some questions during a Q&A period. So excited to engage with all of you, to hear what your thinking is, the things you're wondering. And so we'll dedicate some time, sort of the second big half of this time together, to answer your questions. As they come up, please feel welcome to drop them into the Q&A. And thanks so much for your work in the chat there, Mayan. I really appreciate it. One last thing I'll share with you, actually, Zoom keeping wise, I believe that it's possible to access a live transcription. So if you head down to the bottom of your window, you should be able to select that option and open it up. And I offer that just in case it helps you engage with the work we're doing today. So who is this session for? I flagged with you that I know some folks who are here today, and I'm very excited that there are also folks who I don't know who are engaging with this, either in this moment or into the future. So who is this for? It's for actors, puppeteers, dancers, and other performers. It's for animators, digital artists, writers, and game designers. It's for technicians and folks involved in producing digital and/or interactive media content. It's for directors, movement directors, and teachers. And I think more broadly than that, I would say it's for gamers, for researchers, and anyone else who's curious about the future of storytelling. I hope no matter what your needs are or your availability is today in terms of these explorations, maybe you're in a space that's conducive to that, maybe you're in a space that isn't. I hope that maybe you'll re-engage with the session in the future, or that we'll find together a way that you can taste some of these exercises for yourself. So I'll flag some options as we're moving through, and I hope there might be an opportunity for you to experience a bit of this work. And so let's begin by tasting an exercise together. I named it Experiencing Breath. I'd love to invite you, wherever you are at this moment, to begin to pay attention to the breath, to your own breathing. To the sensations of expanding and contracting, of growing and shrinking, of rising and falling, of reaching and collapsing, whatever the words are for you that you'd like to use to describe this movement in your body. I'd like to invite you, if it's available to you or comfortable, to maybe use a hand on the stomach or a rib or the upper clavicle. Or maybe what you'll do is you'll lean into a chair or a surface to feel the movement of breath that's happening in your body. And if it's safe for you to do so, I'll invite you to perhaps even close your eyes for a moment. And I want to acknowledge, as you're focusing on the movement and the sensation of breath in your own body, that maybe your mind has already begun to wander. Maybe it's dinner time where you are, or maybe it's very, very late. I hear we have folks all around the world, and that's okay. That just means we're human. And I just want to invite you to, with the next breath, see if you can re-engage with the current task, which is noticing the sensations in my body of breath. Is there tension that you notice? What's the temperature of air in your nose, in your mouth, in your throat? Where in my body do I feel the movement of breath? And wherever you are engaging from, or whenever it is for you, I'd love you to perhaps take a couple breaths. And I just want to invite you to congratulate yourself. You're engaging in the class, we're sharing something together, you're doing some learning. Really excited to be sharing it with you. And now I'd like to invite you to consider something else. You may be feeling your breath, and you may be feeling the movement of breath in your body, but the question is, if someone was standing 20 meters away from you, would they see that you're breathing? Would your breath be visible to them? And over the next few breaths, say 20, I'd love to invite you to explore a breath that is more visible, that someone about 20 meters away might perhaps be able to see happening in your body. And it may feel a little bit like you're puppeteering yourself. And I want to encourage you to go in that direction for the next few breaths, to explore a visible breath. I'll invite you to check in with your own body and see what it is that you're offering in terms of the visibility of this movement of breath. Maybe imagine for a moment that shoulders, the movement of the shoulders might be the most important thing, or play with the curl of spine right up through the neck. Maybe you'll favor the lifting of clavicle, a visible breath. And as you make sure that your breath is very, very visible, I want to invite you also to remember that it's possible to feel exactly what you're doing. This isn't a dichotomy that I'm offering. My breath is visible, and I feel everything that my body does. And over the next few breaths, I want to invite you to just relax, to let your breath return to something restful and comfortable. Maybe you'll breathe in through the nose for about 4 counts and breathe out through the mouth for about 4 counts if it's available to you. Maybe you'll be reopening your eyes. Maybe you'll be noticing the weight of one's body interacting with a surface or the floor as you come back from that little exercise. And so I'll unpack that a little bit as we continue, but I'll just flag for you by saying that breath is really huge in motion and performance capture. It's one of the most fundamental ways that I can communicate that a character is alive. It connects to really important things in game practice like states or an animation. And from an embodied perspective, the breath is a really exciting doorway into a lot of the movement work that I like to introduce folks to. So the breath is something important for the medium we're talking about. And I hope maybe it also offered you some starts of an experience in the body. And I'll flag that I used 2 words. I said it was visible, and I actually don't think I mentioned it, but the opposite of that would be felt or invisible. And we'll unpack that a little bit more together. So before we go further, what are we talking about? What is this thing that we're engaging in? Folks have seen something in special features, have played a video game. Some of you, in fact, having seen the attendees, have done quite a bit of performance capture or have been involved on quite a bit of projects. And so there's a whole range of knowledges in the room. And so let's just give ourselves a little foundation here. Motion capture, which is often abbreviated to mocap, is the digital recording of the live action performance of human and other animal actors, typically in a studio set up for that purpose. I'm quoting Rose Woodcock there. It's a great definition of it. I appreciate that it acknowledges that often there are animals that are performing this, or maybe the bodies that are being recorded are non-human. They're objects, they're puppets. So motion capture or mocap is the recording of this performance of movement. Performance capture, or PCAP, as it's often abbreviated, could be defined like this. Mocap is a tool for documentation and capturing movement, while PCAP is the mode of performance that uses a motion capture system. Matt Delbridge. And Delbridge is establishing in literature there that there's technology, which is motion capture, the tools, hardware and software, and then there is performance capture, which is the 21st century medium of performance. Delbridge goes on to say very excitedly that this is fundamentally a medium of performance. And Woodcock goes on to describe it as being not parasitic. It's not removing the movement from actors and dropping it into video games, which are massively successful commercial products. But actually what it's done is perhaps put the movement of actors at the heart of a really exciting creative endeavor. Things like XR technologies or games or filmmaking, live performance and music are utilizing performance capture. And when I last looked, the games industry was valued at present at about $170 billion a year. So terribly exciting. Now, I want to flag for you, there's another set of definitions in the industry. So motion capture in the industry, if you got an audition breakdown for this, that's referring to the capture of the body's movement. It's typically done without face and without your voice being captured for the character. Maybe there are reference recordings of your voice or your face on reference cameras set up around the space, but it's really the movement of the body. Performance capture, on the other hand, if you've got a breakdown for this in the industry, it means that it'll be the capture of your body plus your face plus your voice. Full performance, some people refer to this as. And so you can see in this photo here that I've included on the slide Diane Audrey, a wonderful actor, at a project that we worked on at Beyond Capture Studios for beingAI. I was coaching and being the movement director there. And Diane is in full performance capture, is wearing a suit, a fitting lycra suit with retro-reflective markers on it. Light is emitted from these cameras, infrared light, these specialist cameras that bounces off these markers, is seen by other cameras. They work together, these cameras that collaborate to triangulate where that marker is in the space, a bit like your phone and GPS. And then a motion set is able to be constructed, an image over time of where those markers are and the actor's movement. And then in addition, Diane is wearing a head-mounted camera, an HMC with a camera on it that's recording her face. There are dots on her face to facilitate that process. And Diane, you can see too, is mic'd, is being mic'd. So that's an example of full performance capture happening in a studio dedicated for that. I use this photo for a number of reasons. It's also useful to see that there are reference cameras set up around the space. And so that's an example of motion capture technology facilitating performance capture of the medium. And if we were in the industry, we would say that was a PCAP shoot. Oh, may I also flag, I believe my mentee, Howard Dye, a wonderful actor and creative, is in attendance today. And Howard took this photo, was assisting me on the shoot. So thank you, Howard. Now, what are we talking about? Let's continue this conversation. So there's this space where the capture is happening, this set, this studio, and it's called the volume, because this space of it is what is being captured. So it is the studio space where performance capture takes place. Here's another picture of Beyond Capture Studios' volume. They're here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. They are absolutely world-class in terms of their team and the work they do, working on the most exciting projects. I recommend you check them out. And so this was a shoot where I was providing movement direction for a short film from Calvin Romain, who is a really exciting director, writer, and artist. And here you have Angel and Reese, and they're both acting on this short film in performance capture. Now, please notice a few things here. In the volume, there are very few items of set and of costume. You can see these two are working with an apple box and a simple prop. They're imagining quite a bit around them. Reese here is actually acting in mocap, is not having an HMC on his head and having his face camera captured except by reference cameras around the space. And while Reese's voice was captured, it was just reference. And so Reese is in mocap, whereas Angel here is in performance capture. It's in full performance capture. And you can see even the prop that she's holding is markered, is being captured in the system. Now, I included this photo as well to show back here, there's some real-time footage going on in a game engine. So these two are working in the space, and even while they're working in the background, it's possible to see a previs of their work happening in real time. Really exciting, and it introduces all kinds of interesting questions for us. So a moment ago, we were exploring with the breath a little bit, and I was inviting you to focus on sensation. Then I invited you to consider what your performance might look like to somebody who is about 20 feet away. This is another perspective, another way of experiencing my own body. And I want to flag for you that in performance capture, there's a really unique balance going on for the actor. It's one of the most interesting conversations I think about the medium. We're in this space and we're wearing tight-fitting suits, not costumes, not something suited to the character. And I feel a particular way about my body when I'm wearing that suit and being perceived by other people in it. I'm receiving direction, which just due to the nature of the media sometimes involves notes or comments or language that pulls me a little bit out of myself. Things like, I wish I could see that breath a little bit more. Could you make it bigger or more visible? That makes me feel a certain way about my body. I see a real-time feed of myself. And so I'd like to invite you to think for a moment, what does it feel like when you pass a mirror or your own reflection in a window? Or maybe it's even just about hearing your own voice on a recording. You begin to perceive yourself from the outside when those things happen. And I've only named a few, but when you're working in performance capture, research shows that a lot of folks feel a bit of a challenge in terms of navigating, how do I do the work that I know how to do? This practice that I've developed over time and honed, and I'm excited to employ on this project, when I'm suddenly faced with some of these tricky things. Now, if I was to utilize the language of phenomenology, which is the study of being in the world, or what it is to be conscious and embodied, I'm describing subjective and objective experience. So let me share something before we get back to that. How can we understand this work? Lots of people are interested in having a conversation about motion capture and performance capture existing on a bit of a spectrum here, a bit of a continuum, where to one side, the mocap side, things tend toward a mechanistic and generalized movement practice. That's Mark Evans. I would say that's generally true when we talk about in-game movement or maybe certain forms of character performance. And on the other side, we have performance capture, which is, quote, a new arena for an actor's individual and nuanced embodiment. That's Hayes and Webster. I would say generally that's accurate. Maybe we're thinking of, on the mocap side, in-game motion capture, and on the PCAP side, maybe we're thinking specifically of cinematic work. That feels relatively consistent. Maybe we're thinking on the mocap side, early motion capture performance, things in the 90s, and maybe on the PCAP side, we're thinking of things in the 2010s, in the sort of the past decade of performance, with where performance capture has gone in terms of filmic performance. So I'd say, relatively speaking, I generally agree with that painting. There's mocap and there's PCAP, generalized, specific. But I think it's not so useful when I'm working with actors to just speak about the medium in so narrow a way. I try to invite folks to think about embodied experience on the scale of all performance, all art, and all life, my experience in my body as a person more generally. And so to one side, I would say there's the visible. The visible. It's sharing experience, is how I tend to describe it to folks. Think of motion capture for a creature, the kind of work that you would need to do to make it really clear what's going on there. Or think of puppetry. It's a great example of a live performance art that is very visible in terms of the work. There's a particular way that you're observing your own work and what's happening with the character. Now, on the other end of this spectrum, or this continuum, I'm offering you the word invisible, which I would describe as tasting the experience. You're not so worried about what others are receiving. Your attention is with sensation and with yourself. So when we started the breath exercise together, we were probably beginning in a bit more of an invisible place. My focus was on myself and my body, on what's happening for me. And later on, I encourage you toward a bit of a visible place. Towards the very end, I asked if you might be able to find a bit of a balance. Now, when we talk about the invisible, you could think of performance capture for a game cinematic. You might think of naturalistic film acting. I don't think it's useful when folks sort of flag that within their own aesthetic or cultural sphere, this is good, this is bad acting, and then apply it more generally. It's great that we all have a frame of reference, a lens, an opinion, but sometimes folks approach motion capture work and say, oh, well, it's very general, it's very big, it's bad acting. And what I would say is, no, it's wonderful, complex, rewarding acting that's been made a little bit more visible, perhaps. And sometimes people see the invisible work of filmic acting and think, oh, that's it. That's what acting is. I recognize that in my contemporary culture as being amazing. And what I would say is it is great. It's wonderful things that are happening. Those folks are probably focused on sensation and action. And even within film, there's a whole diversity of styles and outputs in terms of where we fall on this continuum. So I try to help folks achieve something of a balance between visible and invisible. Philip Zurilli, who's one of the most important sort of figures in actor training and phenomenological research, said that everyone is always balancing these two things in their life and their performance. And I think within performance capture, it's one of the most interesting dialogues, one of the most useful things. So to briefly recap, I invited you to explore invisible sensation of the breath, and then maybe a little bit of visible movement tied to the thing. You still feel what's going on. And that balance is the conversation of motion and performance capture. That's what can really unlock it for folks. Maybe you're a dancer and you're used to contemporary dance and your performance is very visible, but you're comfortable tasting your movement while you do that. Well, maybe we'll talk a little bit about making something slightly more invisible for something. And your in-game motion might be where you're really comfortable. Maybe you're a film actor, like many of the folks I teach at the Vancouver Film School. You're really comfortable with subjective tasting your own experience. And what I'm inviting you to do often is just to share things a little bit more clearly for the capture for other folks. So let's taste an experience. Let's do one more together and let's try this a little bit together. I called it collaborating with the air. Again, please engage with this in the way that is comfortable and safe for you, and do be sure that maybe the space you're moving in is a safe one, because this might involve a little bit more. Maybe you're standing, maybe you're sitting, maybe you're lying down, maybe you're just listening and going to imagine this one. I'd love to invite you to begin with me on the really subjective side of that, the invisible side of that continuum. So let's come back to breathing. And over the next few breaths, as you pay attention to the sensation of breath, I'd love to invite you to imagine that the air is thick and heavy, that the air is like heavy fog above you and around you. It's heavy in your nose and mouth. It's heavy when it lands in your lungs. That the air is heavy and weighted. And I want to invite you to find the version of that image that's exciting for you. Maybe you're imagining fog rolling into the space. Maybe for you, it's the heaviness of clouds descending at the end of a long day. Maybe it's the feeling of pulling on a heavy coat, but a heaviness to the air as you breathe. And I want to invite you over the next little while to allow that to influence your body, to allow the sensation that you might be feeling to become slightly more visible. Maybe you'll focus on the out and the down over a series of 10 breaths. Or maybe what you'll do is allow the weight of the air to increase with every breath. The air above you, the air inside your body, the air around you. And hopefully working from the sensation, I want to invite you to make that even more visible. Maybe your shoulders are beginning to bend. Maybe your spine wants to curl. Maybe your breath is heavier. It takes more effort to expand. And wherever you're at, I want to invite you just to focus on the sensation of that for a moment. Let your body relax again. Let go of a little of that. and just be with the sensation of breath. And now let's approach it from a different direction. So we started in the subjective and we started moving our way towards a bit of a balance of visibility. We started in the invisible. Let's start in the visible. I'd love to invite you to begin imagining that the air around you is thick and heavy and resistant. Maybe it's viscous, like warm, thick honey, perhaps. And I want to invite you maybe with an arm, or maybe with your head and neck, maybe with a foot, or maybe with more of your body, depending on how you're playing, to begin to quite visibly move through the air that is thick and heavy and resistant. The air resists you. And you can observe and evaluate your own acting while you're doing this. Does it look like my hand is being resisted by the air? Does it look for someone else like my face and head are being resisted as I mold, as I press, as I work through this viscous, thick air? Maybe it's cookie dough. Maybe it's honey. Maybe it's drying cement. And I want to invite you to remember to breathe. This might be requiring a fair bit of muscular engagement for you. The air is behind you. It's in front of you, it's above you, it's below you, it's around you. You're breathing it at every moment. This air that resists you. And I want to invite you to let it resist you more strongly within the bounds of what's comfortable and safe. The air resists me. And now over the next little while, I'd love to invite you to keep this engagement, perhaps that you have physically with the air, but I'd love to invite you to explore it in more private ways. So maybe all that you do is shift your head through that air. Or maybe all that you do is allow your hand to move through it, or your spine, or every time you take your next breath, feel that the air is resisting you. If you're feeling that sensation as you make this exploration a little less visible, that's great. If you're not, make it more visible again. And slowly find your way there. And then if you're there, if you're finding this feeling of the air resisting you in smaller ways in the body, more private ways, then I want to invite you to layer something on top. So the air is resisting me and I feel it in my neck as I'm moving. But can I also write myself a note? Can I speak a line? Can I adjust my device? Can I watch something happening in the space around me while the air resists me? Over the next little bit, I'd love to invite you to let your breath return to normal, to let go of the possible tension or engagement of that image in the air, and to make sure that you find your way to a comfortable, to a safe, relaxed position. Maybe again, you'll practice a bit of a slower breath through the nose and mouth. I'll give you a moment to find your way back. Just sharing with you, there's some really exciting shout outs, some celebrations of inspirations and projects and people in the chat. Thank you for sharing that. So exciting to see folks joining from all over. And there was even a great phenomenology shout out. And so I appreciate that. There was a bit of an invitation there in this exercise to begin in that invisible place with tasting sensation. And maybe our performance could become a bit more visible just by tending to that other viewpoint, which would be the objective in phenomenology. And then I said, let's start it from the other side. Let's start really visibly and notice that we're feeling things. And just by shifting the way in which I'm exploring things in my body, over time, I might be able to make that experience a little less visible, a little bit more felt. So we started at one end and worked our way, and then we started at the other end and worked our way. And I'd love to say that one is not better than the other. People engage with this work in different ways. And ultimately, what we're trying to do together is be malleable so that our body, our movement, our characterization, the thing we're shaping together can serve, whether it's mocap, PCAP, can serve the project, can serve the director's vision, can serve the folks around me. And I'll just flag for you that we were imagining an environment together, which is a huge part of what I enjoy exploring with actors. So that was part of this as well. Maybe you were beginning to explore a character by doing that in the body. And just to be totally transparent, I was drawing upon Michael Chekhov's atmospheric work, which I've learned from a bunch of folks and developed in my own way and loved sharing with you. So the future of storytelling. Here's a little quote from Adrian Pennington. There seems little doubt that performance capture is set to be a permanent feature of the acting landscape. And beyond this, it's not a stretch to see it as the future of acting, or at least a very big chunk of that future. From my POV in the industry, from the work I've been fortunate to do as an actor in performance capture, as someone who's working on research, as a movement, performance, or cinematic director on projects, I agree. I think that this area of practice is only going to grow and grow and grow as immersive media and gaming does. And in addition to that, I think that we're entering perhaps the age of transmedia storytelling, where properties are explored across a number of different media. Julia's done such wonderful and exciting dialogue about this. And so I think more and more, this flexibility that I've been hopefully describing to you is something that will unlock opportunities for actors. Here's a question that I'd love to leave everyone with today. How will you positively shape the practice and ethics of this developing medium? I think that's where we all need to be collaborating together. I say practice because it is very much yet to be decided the way in which that folks can best engage in this work and create exciting new media. There are lots of practices that have been established and begun, lots of exciting conversations ongoing, but that's really at the heart of my work, is trying to uncover how we might best tell stories together through the body and movement. And then the ethics of this developing medium. For the first time in human history, one's performance, one's movement can be separated from one's image. And that definitely involves all kinds of ethical and moral questions. There are many characters that I could play, and I simply should not, because it would not be equitable of me to be playing those roles. Julia is a real contributor to equity in this way, in terms of ensuring that folks have access to the industry and that casting reflects the stories and the folks who should be telling them. There are other folks who've done really exciting work in this area. You could look at research into sort of how games have been made historically, and things like multi-rolling or NPCs, non-player characters, that movement data being applied across all sorts of folks. There needs to be more work so that games are representative of a true diversity of races and ethnicities, of gender identities, of sexual identities, of bodies, all kinds of ways that we might look at this from an intersectional perspective. And so I just want to flag that the ethics of this medium are developing, and I want to encourage everyone in this conversation to ask themselves that question at every step. How might I positively contribute to the development of this medium? And then there are things like access to data and payment and all kinds of ethical questions about, should I be playing someone who's lived in the world before? And that's happened in a number of projects. And so there are lots of exciting resources out there having that conversation. And I'd love to open it up to you, to all of you, because I think this community, folks who are interested in this practice and who will contribute to it, are the folks who will shape not only practice, but the ethics. Here are a couple references that I was citing directly in our conversation together. Just want to acknowledge those folks and their work. Many more that I cited in my thesis or that presentation for the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts I've put there. We're going to take some time for Q&A now. I really want to dedicate some time to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this Q&A window. There are some questions here. I'll read them out, and then what I'll do is I'll do my best to try and answer them from my own experience, my own perspective. And so if you have questions, please feel welcome to throw them into the chat. There are a couple here to begin with. Here's one from Ariana. Would you say PCAP is closer to stage acting or screen acting in terms of intensity, volume, movement, etc.? It's an amazing question. Thank you for it. So is PCAP closer to stage acting or screen acting in terms of intensity, volume, movement, etc.? It's a tricky question to answer. I'd say in the framework I was offering before, performance capture could be conceived of as being a little closer to invisibility than some motion capture is. But the question is how it relates to these two other things. Some folks have shared the opinion that performance capture is a bit like acting on stage in the body, and then a bit like acting in a 6-inch close-up in the face. So maybe it's a meld of those two things, which is very complex. Delbridge has a great article sort of examining that and the complexity of balancing those perhaps two modes of performance as you work. What I might say personally is that PCAP involves a clarity and commitment of storytelling in the body that maybe is a bit closer to what folks are exploring in stage acting. That's sort of a category unto itself with a lot of diversity. Whereas the style of performance that's often requested is closer to something that you might call conventional filmic naturalism, whether that's in the face and the voice or the way I'm shaping the performance. So there's definitely a bit of a balancing to be done there, I think. I hope maybe that answers the question a bit. Camila, what are some of the reasons why one actor will be in mocap and another one in PCAP in the same scene? That's a great question. Thank you very much for it. So what are some of the reasons why one actor will be in mocap and the other one in PCAP in the same scene? I can speak in general terms to respect projects, but I've done that myself personally on projects before. And so an example of that might be maybe I'm playing a character, but someone else has been the voice, whereas the person I'm acting across from is actually being the voice and the body and the face of the character. That's happened to me before. Maybe the character that I'm playing doesn't require the same animation data for the face as the other character. So I'll invent a situation for you. What if I was playing a robot and the other person in the scene was playing a human? Depending on the project, it's possible that all the animation team needs is the reference video from the conventional cameras set around the space of my face, that they don't actually need the sort of more nuanced data of performance capture. And so then maybe I'm in motion capture and the other person I'm acting with is in performance capture. But what's very exciting is we could do, theoretically, those two things at the same time and catch the whole scene. I hope that that maybe helps a little bit. Nick, and hey, Nick, it's really exciting to have you here. I've always been more of a nuanced actor on film. I found a good challenge in PCAP due to the differences between the two mediums, where nuances can get lost as there are no close-ups per se. I'm also wary of overacting to compensate. What advice do you have to find that balance? Wow, what an exciting question. And it really speaks to the heart of some of the experiences you've had. So thank you for sharing it. I've always been more of a nuanced actor on film. Found a good challenge in PCAP due to the differences between the mediums, where nuances can get lost as there are no close-ups. Also wary of overacting to compensate. Yeah. And so this maybe speaks a little bit to what it is we were exploring together, of saying that rather than perhaps feeling like there's a dichotomy of media here, that my performance and the way I experience my body is always living on this continuum, on the spectrum of experience, of things being visible or things being invisible. And what I would invite you to do is to explore a couple of moments. Maybe you'll take some lines of dialogue, or maybe you'll carry out some actions. Maybe you'll revisit something you've explored before, and to play with not 0 and 100, but to play with everything between there. And so maybe I'll explore this with my filmic style of acting that feels to me really comfortable and successful and great. And what I'll do then is just play with adding 2% more visibility in what I'm doing with my mouth and my eyebrows. And maybe the next time I take this, I'll add just 5% more visibility in breath and state. Then maybe I'll play one with 20% more visibility, just thinking in terms of what's the quality of movement that I'm playing with. So what I'm inviting you to do is to complicate the game a little bit and just piece by piece play on this spectrum, and then say to yourself, maybe you'll record it and say, that felt good and it was more visible. Or, that felt good, but it doesn't look the way I'm hoping it to look. Or maybe that didn't feel great, but actually it looked as visible as I wanted to get. So you can do a little bit of the reflection on what it is that you're experiencing and what it is that folks are receiving. I hope that that maybe helps a tiny bit, and really exciting to have that question. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge for everybody, I think we have about 5 minutes left together, and I'm going to keep moving through these questions. Lawrence, what are some of the barriers for smaller developers to work with mocap and PCAP, and how can these be reduced? Wow, that's a really exciting question, and from a new perspective, so thank you for it. What are some of the barriers for smaller developers to work with mocap and PCAP, and how can these be reduced? In my own experience as someone who's worked as a director and as an actor in the medium, I think I see cost of implementation being a bit of a barrier. To build an optical capture volume like the fantastic one you saw there that belongs to Beyond Capture Studios requires an enormous investment of capital and time. And then another barrier I would identify is the know-how, is the knowledge to actually run that space and to clean data and to interface with customers and clients and to be hiring folks. And so that knowledge is also requires some time and development, and this medium is exploding. And so people who have those skills are really in demand right now. It's so exciting to see folks from, for example, the Vancouver Film School engaging in the animation program with performance capture now in a really exciting way, led by instructor Arthur Gonzalez, who's a wonderful creative, and seeing that those folks are really in demand. So I see a barrier in cost, I see a barrier in know-how. Maybe there are barriers too in terms of practice. So we have the tech, and then now what is it that we do with it? How do we get what we are hoping for from these fantastic creative artists, these actors who are now embodying characters. And so sometimes I see there's also a bit of a hole in productions that I feel sometimes, or other folks I know feel, in terms of interfacing between writers and animators and actors and people who are technicians, and making sure that the production is as successful as we all hope that it could be. Those are a couple barriers I've seen, and I'll just flag a couple things. One of the things you can do is you can reach out to folks who might be able to support that process. Maybe you can outsource casting to experts, folks like the Help Network or Julia. Maybe you can work with people like them to help you identify service providers that might be available to you within your financial means. You could reach out to these service providers and you could have a conversation about whether it might be possible on an indie budget to do X amount of work together. You may be able to work with students at some institutions in terms of cleanup or student actors and in ways like that. You could look for folks who might be able to help as performance directors and movement directors to make sure that the work is as successful as you want it to be. Requires a little investment, but maybe make sure that your other investment is what you're looking for. And there are lots of ways to do capture. And so that's a whole interesting conversation we could have together. I was talking mostly about optical capture happening in a volume, a big space dedicated to it. There are inertial motion capture systems that lots of indie developers work with. We have a couple of suits like that as well at the school that we use in studio settings. They're relatively affordable. They're relatively quick to set up. There's a conversation to be had about quality of data and how things are used and what can happen with one system and what can happen with another system. But there are also a diversity of options for these processes. I hope that that maybe helps a little bit, Lawrence. Really exciting to have that question. I'm just opening the chat here. I see. Oh, wow. I'm just seeing in the chat. Thanks to some folks for sharing some gratitude. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Really exciting to have you. And I also see some folks sharing that some experiences today were moving for them. And I just really want to acknowledge that and thank you for participating and for sharing that with us. That's exciting. Here's another question, Lawrence. With the rise of VTubing, do you think that mocap and PCAP will be making it easier for more actors to do this at home? That's a really exciting one. With the rise of VTubing, do you think that mocap and PCAP will be making it easier for more actors to do this at home? My instinct is yes. I think that as these technologies are becoming more affordable and available, and things are becoming relatively easy, more plug and play and real time in terms of how they're implemented, we're going to see, I think, a lot more folks living, whether it's conventionally over YouTube or whether it's streamed live on other platforms, or whether this is happening in XR environments, in VR, or what's being called the metaverse in a lot of spaces. I do think that we're going to see the rise of these interactions with virtual influencers that are being, let's say, live animated or synchronously animated by actors. I also think we're going to see a rise of AI-driven virtual influencers in these spaces. There will be a collaboration between performance folks and technologists to make that more possible. I think there are technologies, I'll shout out folks like Epic Games with the MetaHumans that are freely available to folks, offering pretty easy to set up assets that could be live animated in real time. I really think that we're going to see folks move in this way. Really exciting question. Thanks. And I am personally happy to continue going with some of these questions. And so I understand that folks may be stepping away. I want to thank you again for being here today. And I'm going to continue for a little while just to make sure that I'm speaking to these if I can. I see one here from, oh, and thanks for that share. I see that in the chat. So exciting. Joseph, for an actor who is pushing to enter into PCAP work, what would you say are prerequisites to work towards? What an exciting question, eh? I'm sure there are lots of folks here who are feeling that way. For an actor who is pushing to enter into PCAP work, what would you say are prerequisites to work towards? Great question. Thank you for it. I think that performance capture is opening up this medium in a really exciting way to folks who have lots of experience and to folks who are maybe this is their first opportunity to engage with this technology. There are all kinds of barriers to access here, whether it's the financial cost of engaging with formal training, whether it's the technology itself, whether it's the relative secrecy of some areas of the industry compared to other areas of the performing arts industry. And so there's a whole diversity of experiences every time I show up on set. And I just want to share that in case folks are feeling like maybe the barriers are too great. There are lots of folks who book work, and for them, it's their first time. Julia is an amazing person to speak to this question. I would say definitely go look at the book, The Art and Business of Acting for Video Games. There's some really great pieces there on this. And what I would say is when I've participated in casting, when I'm directing, what I'm generally looking for from folks is embodied acting, is movement for the actor training. Get really excited when I see that folks have been exploring things like I flagged that I studied Michael Chekhov technique, or maybe folks are coming in having explored other actor movement disciplines. Things like mask are really popular in discourse in the industry in terms of applicability. Maybe someone shares with me that they practice yoga, or that they're a dancer, or that they're a puppeteer. These are all skill sets that I think can translate really well to this medium. So definitely, I'm looking for an actor personally, someone whose skills are really honed in that area. And I'm hoping that they're also someone who are working with their body and whatever that means for them and whatever that capacity is, so that they could hopefully collaborate with us and shape performances that are visible for the technology and that are going to communicate character and situation in a really exciting way. I hope that maybe that helps a little bit, Joseph. Howard, hello. Howard is my mentee. Great to see you. What are the advantages, disadvantages of having PCAP, mocap, reshoots, pickups, rather than just having animators alter the data? That's a really exciting question. Thanks. What are the advantages, disadvantages of having PCAP, mocap, reshoots, pickups, rather than just having animators alter the data? I think that there's probably a diversity of opinions in terms of answering that question, and I embody a particular POV on it. But I've been really fortunate to teach and to work with animators in a diversity of settings and places. There's a time advantage to using motion capture, time and cost. Of course, there's a massive investment to setting up spaces like this, but if you can collaborate successfully with a service provider to capture some motion and performance capture data, it's can be a massive time saver in terms of the animation and game design pipeline. It can also be a cost saver in terms of the time it would take to do something similar. The other thing I'm flagging is that performance capture really arose from a desire for more subjective, individualized, maybe even we could use the word realistic human performance. And so there's also something that collaborating with an actor, you may get that you would be very hard pressed to animate over time. The incredible nuance that a creative actor can bring to a role is, I would say, invaluable. And my delight in my job is collaborating with folks to make sure that that can happen, that those artists can exercise their creativity, and that ultimately it's serving the goal of folks like animators. So there's definitely an advantage to reshooting some things in terms of time and cost, and also what you might get from it. Then maybe for a variety of reasons, it could be more economical, or it could make more sense for you to alter the data. Maybe the alteration is relatively minor. Maybe it was something you were planning on needing to do anyway based on the assets or the particularities of what's going on in terms of your production. Could well be that that actor is not available, just logistical things like that. But in my experience, I see a lot of pickups for things. I see a lot of pickups for things because there are such efficiencies to using motion and performance capture in this pipeline. Though sometimes I do see alterations, altering the camera placement, making shifts to data for similar efficiency reasons, depending on the production. I hope that that maybe helps a tiny bit, Howard. Oh, I'm seeing folks say thank you in the chat, and I just want to say thanks so much for that. And I see Julia's book is in the chat, actingforgames.com. Do check it out. Here's one from Paul. Oh, is there an entry point for testing and home practice from mocap or PCAP? AR, VR services, perhaps? Ah, really interesting question. Thank you. Is there an entry point for testing and home practice from mocap or PCAP? AR, VR services, perhaps? Really exciting. In a way, I think I'm guessing a couple of things here. I wonder if by entry point you mean cost, and I wonder by entry point you mean sort of knowledge of things, if that makes sense, capacity, perhaps, for testing in a home practice for mocap and PCAP, AR, VR services, perhaps. And so I'm intuiting here that maybe you're asking a little bit about setting it up and exploring it yourself, and maybe the goal is to be exploring AR and VR or other XR media. And so to that, I would say entry point wise, for most conventionally available gear, you're probably looking to spend somewhere in the range of several to maybe $10 and a bit thousand, depending on what range of gear you're looking at, what region of the world you're in, what currency you're using. Depends on what you're hoping for. So let me actually complicate that even further. I'm just checking the chat because maybe this is you. Oh, okay, amazing. I can complicate that even further and say you could buy from Meta Quest 2 headset, and that is performance capture. It is tracking the location of the two hand remotes and the approximate placement in relation to them of your head through cameras, through an optical system and some software. So I would say I think that retails for about a few $100s in the region in which I am. You're doing simple motion and performance capture with essentially 3 points of input. There have been a couple of VR productions that I've done where that is the complexity of the capture. Folks are in our spaces around the world, and so are the synchronous audience members or participants, I would say, of the VR experience. Double I did this, so did Single Thread Theatre Company in Canada. And we have 3 points of capture. So on my spectrum of performance, I'm way towards the visible. I'm way towards what we might describe as earlier mocap and maybe even a more generalized performance. I need to breathe with my head. I need to stay animated with only the ability to move my hands and head. So it's really a generalized performance there. But that's a few $100s, and you could be streaming things into VR or AR platforms with just that gear. Just the means to access those media could give you the streaming potential. You could complicate that further. You could start using some inertial gear. Maybe what you want to be doing is actually recording data and then playing it in as animations into an AR and a VR world. And so I'd say from a couple of $100s, you could even find, actually, let me say, I even saw a production at the Festival of Live Digital Art in 2019. And this was from Dream Adoption Society, which are typically based in Poland. Wonderful artists. I've collaborated with them a little bit on some XR projects, and they were using a couple of Kinects, a couple of Xbox Kinects, and a setup that they had worked together to do some live performance capture through that optical system. So I would say from a range of maybe a few $100s, and I'm using Canadian currency when I say that, to many thousands of dollars. There's a whole complexity of what might be available to you. And what might be most useful perhaps is to say to yourself, what's my end goal? What do I really want to test here? What do I hope to get towards? And then do a little backwards research on things like YouTube or boards online. Feel free to reach out to me and say, what have people done? What have people done in the past? What might I be able to test and do relatively affordably? I hope that maybe that helps just a little bit, Paul. Oh, amazing. Great. Cheers. And then I see a question from Lisa, and this will be the last one today, and then I'll share a final slide with you. Lisa, I'm about to start work on my first PCAP game. Oh, congratulations. Any advice where to gain more knowledge so I can walk into the shoot with confidence? What an exciting question. I'm about to start work on my first PCAP game. Any advice where to gain more knowledge so I can walk into the shoot with confidence? Well, Lisa, congratulations. That's fantastic. I'm so happy for you, and how exciting to have that in the session. Somebody who's getting ready for their first session. Lisa, I would check out Julia's book. Go to actingforgames.com. There's some awesome terminology in there. You could rewatch this session if you want to try some things a little bit more. I would say to you, go look up the Screen Stir podcast. And there was an episode from Jessica Jeffries a few years ago. Jessica is also a casting director for interactive media and performance capture in the United Kingdom. She's a fabulously accomplished performance capture actor as well in her own right. And Jessica speaks in that about her own approach. And I think it's really approachable, really speaks about what it's like to be in the Lycra and in the volume. Maybe that's something you might like. That podcast episode is available online. And what I would say to you too, Lisa, is maybe reach out to a coach. You could reach out to me if you want. You could reach out to other folks who are working in the media and say, hey, I'd love to run through a few things. I wonder if you might be able to help me prep something. And the last thing I would say is find the thing for yourself that gets you really engaged in your own body and excited about engaging through the body. And so maybe over the next little bit, you'll practice some yoga, maybe once a day if that's available to you. Or maybe for the next little bit, you'll go for a run before you work on this scene so that you're really actively, intentionally saying, I'm going to be working from the body. I'm thinking about that. I'm reflecting on what it is to be in the body as I'm doing this prep. Oh, I hope you have a wonderful time. I'm very excited for you. And I see, perhaps, that that's the end of the questions that we have in this window. So I'm just opening up the chat here as I hop on over to, oh, and thanks for that. Thanks for these thanks in the chat as I pop on over to a final slide. So I want to say thank you to everybody, whether you were here with us today, whether you needed to step away, whether you're listening to this as a recording. Thank you for engaging with this presentation. So excited to talk about motion performance capture and 21st century actor movement with everyone. This is the work, this is the topic that gets me excited every day. I'm so fortunate to be working in it, and I hope that maybe it shared a few things with you that you might be able to develop further, to explore further. Maybe one day we'll have that chance together. Please do check out my own website, charlesdouglas.ca, and please do check out actingforgames.com. Julia's book is spectacular. I can't recommend it enough. Here are a couple pictures of folks, animation students, who I've had the privilege of working with again at the Vancouver Film School, doing some shoots at Beyond Capture Studios. Thought maybe I'd leave you with that, as these folks are going to enter the industry and shape it with all of you. I see some thanks coming in here. Thank you so much, folks. Really exciting to engage with you all. And thanks again to the Help Network, to Julia, to Myhan for putting this together. It's just such a privilege, such an honor to get to offer. And so, thank you so much, folks. Wishing you the best. Good luck to you. And I hope to see your contributions one day to this medium and these conversations. Bye-bye.